Retire Young, Die Rich? Myth or Method? Full audiobook. Chapter 1. The Seduction of Early Wealth. You have probably seen the promise written in bold letters across glossy magazine covers or shouted in late-night television ads. Retire before your hair turns gray. Live free while your friends are stuck in traffic. And watch the money roll and while you sip drinks by the ocean. The idea is powerful because it speaks directly to your secret wish to escape the grind and enjoy life on your own terms. Everyone, from a teenager scrolling through videos on a cracked phone to a middle-aged employee counting the hours in a fluorescent-lit office, has at some point thought about what it would be like to never worry about work again. That whisper in your mind is not just fantasy, it is the lure of early wealth. The seduction is not only about money. It is about what money promises: freedom, control, and the luxury of time. You imagine yourself waking when you want instead of when an alarm insists. You picture walking slowly through a quiet morning, maybe taking your children to school without rushing or enjoying a gym session in the middle of the day while others are chained to their desks. These small details make the vision so intoxicating. Retiring young seems like the key to reclaiming the hours that were stolen from you. Yet behind the glitter of this dream lies a deep psychological pull that marketers and so-called wealth gurus understand very well. They know you are tired of being told to wait. You grew up hearing that one day, in your 60s or 70s, you will finally rest. But inside, you rebel against that idea. You do not want to give the best years of your body and energy to a system that only rewards you when you are old. So the picture Retire Young, Die Rich lands on fertile ground. It tells you that maybe, just maybe, you can escape the trap and live differently. Think about the stories that circulate online. A 22-year-old who claims to have flipped houses and walked away with $2 million. A couple in their early 30s who say they invested in cryptocurrency in 2013 and now travel the world full-time. These tales are repeated and shared not because they are common, but because they are rare. Like fairy tales, they capture your imagination and make you believe the treasure is within reach if you only find the right map. But let's pause for a moment and step into the shoes of someone real. Imagine a young man named Daniel, 25 years old, sitting in his tiny apartment after another long day of work. He earns just under $35,000 a year and spends almost everything on rent, groceries, and student loans. One night, he scrolls through his phone and sees a headline: "Quit your job by 30, how I did it." He clicks, heart racing, as he reads about someone who turned a $10,000 investment into a fortune. He thinks, if I can just find the same trick, maybe I could escape too. This is how the seduction works. It does not need to be logical. It just needs to make you hope. The reason this idea is so magnetic is that it touches both your fears and your desires at the same time. You fear wasting your life in a cubicle. You desire to be seen as successful, admired, and free. Combine fear and desire, and you create a powerful hunger that is easy to manipulate. Financial influencers, investment newsletters, even some legitimate businesses lean on this hunger to sell you their version of a shortcut. They present you with complex charts and words that sound intelligent. But what they are really selling is the dream itself. Now, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with wanting freedom. In fact, the drive to reclaim your time can be one of the most productive forces in your life. The danger lies in believing that the fantasy is simple or guaranteed. Take the example of a man named Robert, who during the late 1990s invested heavily in internet startups. Within 2 years, his account ballooned to more than $1 million. He quit his job at 32, convinced he had beaten the system. But by 2001, the market crashed, his investments vanished, and Robert was back in an office cubicle, this time older, bitter, and further behind. His story rarely makes the headlines because failure does not sell. Yet his experience is far more common than the glamorous tales of overnight millionaires. The seduction of early wealth also thrives on the culture of comparison. You open social media and see someone your age posing with a sports car or a luxury watch. You do not know if it is leased, borrowed, or even rented for the day, but the image stings. It whispers, you are behind. The more you feel behind, the more desperate you become for a quick escape. That desperation makes you willing to take risks that, in calmer moments, you would never consider. You put money into a scheme you barely understand, or you chase an investment tip from a stranger on the internet. The dream of retiring young blinds you to the danger. To really grasp the pull of this fantasy, think about how your brain interprets risk and reward. If someone offers you the chance to double $10,000 in 1 year, your rational mind may know it is unlikely, but your emotional mind starts calculating how life would change if it worked. Suddenly, you picture paying off your loans, traveling to Europe, maybe even leaving your job. That picture feels so vivid that it outweighs the cold facts. The seduction of early wealth is not about probability. It is about possibility. And possibility, no matter how small, is enough to keep you hooked. The truth is that myths survive not because they are true, but because they are useful. The myth of retiring young and dying rich gives you something to dream about when reality feels heavy. It gives you hope that there is a hidden exit door from the rat race. But as you listen to these words, I want you to recognize the myth for what it is, a story designed to capture your attention. Whether you fall victim to it or rise above it depends on whether you can separate fantasy from method. For now, it is enough to see clearly that the seduction is real, that it affects not just strangers on magazine covers, but you, sitting with your own private thoughts late at night. This recognition is the first step, because only when you see how the myth works can you begin to ask the deeper question. Is it possible to retire young and die rich in a way that is not built on illusion, but on something solid? The appeal of early retirement is not confined to headlines or social media posts. It seeps into casual conversations at family gatherings, where someone whispers about a cousin who cashed out early or a neighbor who made a killing in real estate. These small stories carry an almost mythical quality. You hear them, you repeat them, and with each repetition the line between truth and exaggeration blurs. What you're left with is a cultural echo, a shared fantasy that says somewhere out there is a golden shortcut waiting to be discovered. But every myth has a shadow. What is rarely spoken about are the countless people who tried and failed, those whose attempts to seize freedom early left them worse off than when they began. Consider a woman named Melissa. At 29, she inherited $50,000 after her grandmother passed away. Rather than invest carefully, she threw nearly all of it into a friend's startup with promises of tripling her money within 3 years. For a short time, the business looked alive, with glossy brochures and slick websites. But by the time she turned 32, the company collapsed and her inheritance was gone. Melissa was left not only without the cushion her grandmother had intended for her, but also with a lingering sense of shame. This side of the story, the failed attempt, never makes it into the inspirational posts you scroll through, yet it is far more common. The seduction works because it combines numbers with narrative. When you read that someone turned $10,000 into $100,000, the figures alone mean little. It is the story wrapped around them that moves you. You imagine what you would do with that sudden windfall. Pay off debt, buy freedom from your boss, surprise your parents with a gift they could never afford. The story invites you to step inside and play the lead role. You begin to forget that behind the glamorous stories are thousands of untold failures. The psychology behind this allure is powerful. Your brain is wired to notice success stories more than failures. If one person out of 1,000 becomes a millionaire by trading stocks, the mind ignores the 999 who lost money. This is called survivorship bias, and it fuels the illusion that retiring young and rich is not only possible but probable. Your brain latches on the shining survivor and whispers, "If they can do it, maybe I can too." It is not foolishness that draws you in. It is biology. Think for a moment about how this myth plays out in everyday life. Imagine sitting at lunch with coworkers. The conversation turns to dreams of the future. One says, "If I ever win the lottery, I'm gone tomorrow." Another says, "If my investments just double, I'll never work another day." Everyone laughs, but beneath the laughter lies longing. Each person is measuring their own cage and wondering if the key is out there somewhere. In that moment, the myth unites them. The fantasy of retiring young is not just a private thought. It becomes a shared cultural dream, repeated in jokes, in advertisements, in late-night musings when the alarm for tomorrow already feels too close. There is also the pull of rebellion. When you chase the dream of retiring young, You are not only seeking freedom, you are also resisting the path that was handed down to you. Maybe your parents worked until their bodies ached, saving every dollar, only to finally rest when age had already stolen their strength. Maybe you watched them sacrifice the best years of their lives for the promise of comfort in their 70s. You do not want that path. You want to believe there is another way. That belief gives you courage, but it can also push you into reckless decisions. Take the story of Jonathan, a young man in his late 20s who earned a solid salary of $55,000 a year. He grew frustrated watching others brag online about fast gains. So he decided to trade options, a form of high-risk investing he barely understood. Within 6 months, he turned a small profit of $5,000 into $20,000. The rush was intoxicating. He told friends he would quit his job by 35. But over the next year, his $20,000 evaporated. Not only was the money gone, but his focus at work declined, his relationship suffered, and he was left with gnawing bitterness. Jonathan did not tell his story on social media. He quietly went back to the grind, haunted by the taste of freedom that slipped away. When you hear tales of early wealth, you must remember that they are often polished and incomplete. The magazine headline does not mention the sleepless nights, the risky leverage, or the hidden debts behind the image of a smiling young retiree. The glamorous couple in Bali may be living off credit cards, praying their next project works. The man with the luxury car may be leasing at a cost that quietly eats his savings. The myth thrives on images, not on reality. And yet, even as you know this, the dream refuses to die. Why? Because it is rooted not only in money but in something deeper, the desire to live fully before life slips away. You do not want to wait until your 60s to travel, to create, to explore. You want to do it while your legs are strong, while your heart still races at new experiences. This urgency makes the myth so resilient. It is not only about greed, it is about time. As this part of the story closes, you must recognize the seduction for what it is, a blend of hope, fear, and urgency that has been carefully fed to you through culture and commerce. You cannot escape its influence completely, but you can choose how you respond. Some will chase it blindly and pay the price. Others will step back, examine it, and decide whether the path is truly a method or merely a myth. That choice, though subtle, is where your own story begins to diverge. Chapter 2. The Hidden Cost of Chasing Speed. The promise of early wealth often blinds you to the price you will pay for rushing. The glossy vision shows only the bright side. The car, the house, the freedom from alarms and bosses. What it hides are the tolls, collected quietly along the way. These tolls are not only financial. They seep into your health, your relationships, and your sense of stability. The faster you try to run, the more invisible walls you collide with. Leaving bruises are often hidden until it's too late. One of the most dangerous costs is the erosion of patience. You live in a culture of immediacy, where food arrives in minutes, entertainment is streamed instantly, and answers are a click away. That same appetite spills into the way you view money. You do not want to wait 20 years for investments to grow steadily. You want them to double in 12 months. Yet this hunger for speed corrodes your ability to stick with the very habits that create lasting wealth. Like soil stripped of nutrients by over-farming, your patience becomes too barren to grow anything sustainable. Consider the example of Anthony, a man in his early 30s who earned a steady income of $60,000 a year. He had saved $15,000 over time, a modest but solid foundation. Tempted by stories of friends who had struck it big, he moved the entire amount into volatile day trading. In the first month, he watched his account leap from $15,000 to $25,000. The thrill was electric. But by the third month, as markets turned, his $25,000 shrank to $8,000. His desire for speed had not only erased years of savings, but also shattered his confidence. The cost was not just the lost money, but the emotional toll of seeing years of effort evaporate in a handful of impulsive trades. The chase for speed also strains relationships. When you are consumed with the idea of escaping quickly, every conversation with a partner or friend becomes charged with tension. Imagine sitting at dinner while your spouse wants to talk about weekend plans, but all you can think about is whether the stock you bought today will rise or fall tomorrow. You pretend to listen, but your eyes flick to the screen. That silent distance grows like a crack in glass. The pursuit of rapid wealth promises a better life. But in the meantime, it steals the joy of the life you already have. Then there is the physical toll. Stress is the body's alarm system, and when you gamble your future on speed, the alarm rings endlessly. Your chest tightens when markets open. Your sleep is shallow because you replay trades in your head. You skip meals or overeat, trying to calm the constant rush of adrenaline. Over time, this lifestyle carves deep grooves into your health. The very freedom you crave slips further away because you are too exhausted or sick to enjoy it when it comes. But perhaps the greatest hidden cost is the illusion of control. When you chase speed, you convince yourself that you are smarter than the crowd, that you see patterns others miss. This belief feeds your ego until it blinds you. You start to ignore warnings, dismiss advice, and double down on risks. It feels empowering at first, but it sets you up for devastating falls. Think back to the financial crisis of 2008. Millions of people, from professionals on Wall Street to ordinary homeowners, believed the good times would keep rolling. They borrowed heavily, speculated recklessly, and assumed the ride would never end. When the crash came, it wiped out not just fortunes but entire lives built on illusions. Let's bring this down to something smaller, closer to your daily life. Imagine you receive a tax refund of $4,000. Instead of saving it or using it to pay down debt, you are tempted to put all into a speculative investment that promises to double quickly. Maybe a coworker whispers about a hot stock, or a friend tells you about a can't-miss opportunity. The potential upside makes your heart race. You picture turning that $4,000 into $8,000 and feel clever already. But if the gamble fails, you are not just out $4,000. You are out the peace of mind that money could have given you, the reduction in debt, the buffer against emergencies. The true cost is not only the lost dollars, but the stability you traded away. The myth of retiring young and dying rich tells you that the faster you run, the sooner you arrive. The reality is harsher. Each shortcut comes with a price tag you rarely see up front. The erosion of patience, the strain on relationships, the toll on your body, and the shattering of illusions are all part of the bill. You may not notice the charges immediately, but they accumulate quietly, like interest on a hidden debt. As you reflect on this, you begin to understand that chasing speed is not just a financial risk. It is a life risk. The hidden costs compound until the dream that once felt like freedom becomes a trap of your own making. And recognizing those costs is the first step toward deciding whether the path of speed is truly worth the price you are paying. The hunger for shortcuts has always existed, but today it has grown louder, more persuasive, and harder to resist. You are surrounded by stories of people who seem to have leapt ahead of the line, skipping the years of discipline and arriving directly at success. They make the leap look effortless, and you cannot help but compare their highlight reels with your own quiet struggle. This comparison fuels a cycle of urgency, convincing you that if you do not move quickly, you will miss your chance forever. That urgency itself is one of the steepest costs, because it pushes you into decisions that are reactive rather than deliberate. Take the story of Sophia, a woman in her late 20s who worked as a nurse. Her income was steady but not extravagant, and she managed to save $10,000 over several years. One evening, she saw an advertisement promising enormous returns through a new trading platform. The pitch was clear: invest now before the window closes. Afraid of missing out, she put the entire $10,000 into the scheme. Within 6 months, the platform disappeared, taking her savings with it. The money was gone, but the deeper wound was the erosion of her trust in herself. She no longer believed she could make wise financial choices, and that loss of confidence became a heavier burden than the vanished cash. This is a hidden danger of chasing speed. The emotional scars remain long after the financial loss is forgotten. Every failed shortcut becomes a whisper in your mind, telling you that you are unlucky, incapable, or behind. Those whispers grow louder each time you see someone else succeed, and they can paralyze you from taking even the sensible steps that truly build wealth. You become caught between recklessness and paralysis, swinging wildly from one extreme to the other, and both extremes keep you stuck. Another cost that is rarely spoken of is the narrowing of vision. When you fixate on rapid gains, your world shrinks until it revolves around numbers on a screen. You stop noticing the opportunities that grow quietly over time, learning a new skill, building a business patiently, cultivating relationships that might open doors years down the line. Your eyes are locked on the scoreboard, and while you obsess over each point gained or lost, entire games of life pass by unnoticed. The irony is cruel. In chasing the illusion of a bigger life, you end up living a smaller one. Think of Daniel, who worked in marketing and became obsessed with cryptocurrency. In 2017, he invested nearly all of his $30,000 in savings into digital coins. For a short period, his account doubled, then tripled, and his thoughts were consumed with prices, charts, and predictions. He ignored friends, skipped family gatherings, and even declined a promising job opportunity because he was convinced trading would make him richer faster. When the market collapsed, most of his gains evaporated. By then, his friendships had weakened, his career opportunity was gone, and his health was strained from sleepless nights. The true loss was not the money itself, but the life he had sacrificed while staring at glowing screens. The chase for speed also breeds addiction. The rush of a quick win lights up the same parts of the brain as gambling. You feel invincible after a lucky gain, and the high pushes you to risk more, even when logic warns otherwise. You tell yourself it's a strategy, but in reality, it is compulsion. And like any addiction, it demands higher stakes for smaller thrills until you are trapped in a spiral of risk that no longer has anything to do with building a meaningful life. Even when you win, the costs remain. Suppose you take a gamble and it works. You double your money in a matter of weeks. At first, you feel unstoppable, but soon the victory turns sour. You cannot stop wondering if you should have risked more, if you should keep chasing. The win does not bring peace. It brings a hunger that grows sharper. You are no longer satisfied with ordinary progress because you have tasted the sugar rush of speed. The result is a restless dissatisfaction with anything that feels slow, even if slow is what creates lasting stability. The hidden cost of chasing speed accumulates silently, and their weight shows up not only in bank accounts but in bodies, hearts, and minds. You may think you are sprinting toward freedom, but what you are really doing is running in circles inside a cage built of urgency, comparison, and illusion. Breaking free from that cage requires more than money. It requires clarity, discipline, and the courage to say no to the lie that faster is always better. And as you begin to see these costs clearly, you realize that the question is not whether you can run faster, but whether the finish line you are chasing even leads to the life you truly want. Chapter 3. Building Wealth the Unsexy Way. You might not want to hear this, but the truth about lasting wealth is far less glamorous than the glossy images sold to you. It does not come from a secret code or a hidden loophole. It comes from habits so ordinary, so unremarkable, that most people dismiss them as boring. Yet it is exactly these unsexy practices that build fortunes quietly, almost invisibly, while the loud chasers of quick success burn out. Wealth grows like a tree, slow and steady, with roots that reach deep into the soil long before branches touch the sky. The unsexy way begins with living below your means. That phrase might sound like punishment, but in reality, it is liberation. When you spend less than you earn, you create space, and that space is where freedom begins. If your income is $50,000 a year, and you learn to live comfortably on $40,000, you now hold $10,000 in your hands each year that can be planted like seeds. At first, $10,000 may feel small, almost insignificant. But when those seeds are planted consistently over decades, they grow into something extraordinary. Consider this. If you invested $10,000 a year at an average annual return of 7%, after 10 years you would have just under $138,000. After 20 years, that figure grows to more than $400,000. By 30 years, it becomes over $1 million. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just steady deposits into the soil of time. What feels unremarkable in the moment compounds into results that are nothing short of astonishing. Yet numbers alone cannot tell the story. To understand the unsexy way, you need to meet someone like Margaret. She worked as a school teacher, earning a modest salary of $32,000 in the late 1980s. She never bought luxury cars, never owned designer clothes, and rarely ate at restaurants. Friends tease her for being frugal, for packing lunches in the same worn bag year after year. What they did not see was that she invested a portion of every paycheck into index funds, boring baskets of stocks that quietly mirror the market. Decades passed, and when Margaret retired in her 60s, she had accumulated more than $1.5 million. She never won the lottery, never struck it rich overnight, but she built her fortune brick by brick, unnoticed until the house was complete. This is a paradox of wealth. The path that looks too dull to follow is often the one that works. You are drawn to excitement, to drama, to the thrill of quick gains. But excitement is a terrible teacher in finance. It leads you to chase, to gamble, to fall. Boredom, discipline, and repetition. These are the quiet allies of wealth. They do not shout. They whisper, and their whispers carry across decades. Another part of the unsexy way is protecting what you already have. Building wealth is not only about making money, it is about keeping it. Insurance, emergency funds, and conservative planning may not stir your heart, but they are the walls that keep storms from sweeping away your progress. Imagine saving diligently for 10 years only to face a medical emergency without insurance. One unexpected bill of $50,000 could erase everything. The unsexy choice to pay monthly premiums is not exciting, but it keeps your foundation intact when life throws its inevitable punches. And then there is debt. Debt can feel like a shortcut, a way to enjoy life now while paying later. But carrying heavy debt is like walking with weights strapped to your legs. Every step toward wealth becomes slower, harder, more exhausting. The unsexy discipline of avoiding high-interest debt or paying off quickly frees you to run faster in the long term. A credit card balance of just $5,000 and an interest rate of 20% will cost you $1,000 a year simply to stand still. That is money you could plant it as seeds, lost instead to the illusion of living faster than you can afford. The unsexy way does not mean joyless living. It does not mean denying yourself everything beautiful. It means choosing with wisdom which pleasures you savor now and which you trade for greater freedom later. It means asking not, what will impress others today, but what will serve my future tomorrow? That shift in mindset is quiet but revolutionary. As you absorb these truths, you begin to see wealth differently. It is not a game of speed, but a game of endurance. Not a spectacle for others, but a foundation for yourself. And though the habits may seem dull, the results they deliver are anything but. The unsexy way may not turn heads in the moment, but in the long run, it is the very method by which freedom is truly won. The hardest part of the unsexy way is not understanding it, but living it. You already know you should save, invest steadily, and avoid debt, yet you struggle to do it. The struggle comes from the silence of progress. When you gamble, the thrill is immediate. When you save consistently, the reward is invisible for years. You do not feel richer after skipping dinner out or putting $300 into an index fund. You feel the sting of sacrifice without the comfort of instant results. That gap between effort and visible reward is where most people give up. But if you can endure that silence, you enter the rare company of those who reap the fruits of compounding. Imagine you are 25 years old and invest $300 every month. It feels small, even frustrating. Yet by the time you are 45, that steady contribution at a modest return of 7% becomes more than $150,000. By 65, it grows to more than $700,000. Nothing dramatic, no headline-worthy story, just quiet repetition. What others overlook becomes your treasure. To humanize this truth, consider the life of James and Clara, a married couple who began with modest incomes in the early 1990s. James was a postal worker, Clara a librarian. They never earned more than a combined $70,000 a year. Their friends drove newer cars, bought larger houses, and took expensive vacations. James and Clara chose differently. They drove a reliable but aging sedan, lived in a small 2-bedroom home, and spent summers visiting local parks instead of flying abroad. Each year, they saved 10% of their income and invested it in diversified funds. 3 decades later, as they near retirement, they had accumulated nearly $1.2 million. Their friends often wondered aloud how they had done it, assuming some hidden windfall. The secret was no secret at all. It was simply the unsexy way lived with quiet determination. Another element that defines this path is automation. The more you rely on willpower, the more likely you are to fail. By setting up automatic transfers into savings and investments, you remove the daily battle of choice. You do not argue with yourself each month about whether you can afford to invest. The decision is already made. This lack of drama is precisely why it works. Wealth becomes a habit that happens in the background, leaving you free to focus on living rather than constantly negotiating with your impulses. The unsexy way also invites you to redefine success. Instead of measuring yourself against others' possessions, you measure yourself against your own progress. You stop asking, "Do I look wealthy?" and begin asking, "Am I free?" That subtle shift dismantles the pressure to keep up with people who may themselves be drowning in debt. It replaces comparison with clarity, and clarity is far more powerful than envy. Of course, there will be moments of doubt. You will watch others leap ahead with apparent ease, and you will wonder if you are being foolish for choosing the slower path. In those moments, remember that wealth is not measured in snapshots, but in seasons. Someone who shines for a year may disappear in 5. Someone who builds quietly for decades is still standing long after the applause fades. To see this, imagine 2 co-workers, David and Eric. David puts $300 into a speculative stock each month, chasing the thrill of potential jackpots. Eric invests the same $300 into a boring index fund. After 5 years, David brags at the office party about doubling his money, showing off a shiny new car he bought with the gains. Eric smiles politely, his account growing silently. But 10 years later, David's luck has run dry. His stock choices faltering, his car payments heavy. Eric, meanwhile, has seen his investments grow to more than $50,000, quietly compounding toward financial freedom. The story of who truly won is not told in the short term, but in the patient unfolding of time. This is the essence of the unsexy way. Small, consistent actions that feel invisible until they suddenly seem unstoppable. Like water carving stone, the process is gentle but relentless. It does not promise instant escape or dramatic headlines. What it promises is real freedom. Freedom built on a foundation so solid that no market swing, no passing fad, no fleeting trend can take it away. And while it may never look glamorous on the surface, the unsexy way is the path that quietly outlasts every shortcut, delivering not only wealth but peace of mind that cannot be faked. Chapter 4. Stories behind the numbers. Numbers can impress you, but they rarely move your heart. Charts can explain returns, but they cannot capture the taste of sacrifice or the sting of failure. To understand the difference between myth and method, you need to look at lives, not spreadsheets. Real people, with their hopes and fears, reveal truths that numbers alone cannot. Behind every balance sheet lies a story, and it is in those stories that the real lessons of wealth are hidden. Take the case of Michael, a man in his late 20s during the 1990s tech boom. He was a programmer with modest savings of $15,000. Drawn by the frenzy around internet stocks, he poured everything into a handful of companies he barely understood. Within 2 years, his account swelled to over $120,000. He was convinced he had discovered the secret path to riches. At 31, he quit his job, certain he would never have to work again. But when the dot-com bubble burst, his account shrank to less than $10,000. In the space of 18 months, he lost not only his wealth, but also his confidence. His story is not one of numbers. It is a story of seduction over confidence, and a hard lesson about what happens when you mistake a lucky way for permanent success. Now contrast that with Eleanor, who worked as a nurse for more than 3 decades. Her income was never high, hovering between $30,000 and $40,000 a year. She started investing small amounts in mutual funds in the early 1980s, often no more than $200 a month. To outsiders, it looked insignificant. But Eleanor was consistent. She ignored the fads, resisted the temptation of hot tips, and never stopped contributing. By the time she retired, her portfolio had grown to nearly $900,000. Her wealth was not the result of brilliance or timing. It was a fruit of persistence and patience. Her story shows that the method is not glamorous, but it is reliable. These 2 lives tell you more than any chart could. Michael chased speed and lived the myth. Eleanor embraced patience and lived the method. Their outcomes diverged not because of intelligence or opportunity, but because of choices, repeated over time. But there are stories that show an even more nuanced truth. Consider Jason and Maria, a couple who ran a small bakery in a mid-sized town. They never made more than $75,000 a year combined. For years, they struggled to keep the business afloat, reinvesting every spare dollar. Their friends often wondered why they worked so hard for such modest returns. But what others missed was that Jason and Maria were building more than a bakery. They were building an asset. By the time they reached their 50s, the bakery had become a local institution. They eventually sold it for more than $1 million, enough to secure their retirement. Their story illustrates that wealth can also come from building something tangible, slowly, with persistence, even when it looks unimpressive from the outside. Numbers without stories can mislead you. A headline might tell you that someone doubled their net worth in a year, but without the story, you do not know if they borrowed recklessly, sacrificed relationships, or stumbled into luck they could never repeat. Stories remind you that money is never just money. It is time, energy, choices, and consequences woven together. Imagine sitting with two people at the same table. One shows you a bank account with $200,000 gained through risky trading. The other shows you the same amount earned through 20 years of steady saving and investing. On paper, they look identical, but their stories are not the same. The trader carries anxiety, watching markets obsessively, wondering when luck will run out. The saver carries calm, knowing that each dollar represents years of discipline and will continue to grow without desperate chasing. Which account would you rather own? The answer depends not only on the balance, but on the story you want to live. Behind every number is a narrative. And if you want to see clearly, you must look past the surface into the lives of those who embody either the myth or the method, because in their stories, you will find the lessons that shape your own. Numbers alone can never explain why some people thrive and others collapse. They can show the result but not the path, the total but not the trade-offs. Every financial outcome you see is tied to a human life, with sacrifices, risks, and moments of doubt that no chart can capture. The myth of retiring young and dying rich often hides these details, but when you look closer, the stories tell you the truth. Take Rebecca, for instance. She grew up in a modest household and started her career as a teacher, earning just under $30,000 a year. Her friends often complained about how little money their jobs brought, but Rebecca took a different approach. She committed to saving 10% of every paycheck from her very first year, even when it meant driving an old car and living in a small apartment. Over time, she raised her contributions as her salary grew. By the time she was in her mid-50s, her portfolio had quietly reached over $700,000. Her story is not flashy, yet it shows how an ordinary income can create extraordinary security when paired with extraordinary consistency. Now look at Marcus, who also started with a modest job but wanted wealth fast. He borrowed $10,000 on credit cards to invest in penny stocks, convinced he had spotted opportunities others missed. For a brief period, his account doubled, and he felt unstoppable. He bought expensive clothes and spoke about retiring before 40. But within a year, his positions collapsed, and he was left not only with nothing but with crushing debt that followed him for years. The number in his account looked the same as Rebecca's at one brief point. Both had doubled their money, but the stories could not be more different. One built slowly with roots deep in the ground. The other reached upward too fast and toppled at the first storm. Another story comes from Harold and Irene, a couple who worked as a mechanic and a hairdresser. Their incomes were never large, but they made a choice early in their marriage to live on one income and save the other. It was not easy. Friends teased them for their small house, for vacations spent camping instead of flying to resorts, for secondhand furniture that looked outdated. But as the years rolled on, their investments grew. By the time they were ready to retire, they had amassed nearly $2 million, more than enough to support a comfortable life. Their children later said the greatest gift Harold and Irene gave them was not money, but the lesson that wealth is built in silence, through sacrifice and unity. These stories matter because they strip away the illusion that wealth is simply about finding the right number or the right trick. You see that character, discipline, and time shape outcomes more than luck ever could. You also see that chasing the myth often leads to ruin, while embracing the method creates freedom. When you hear that someone has $1 million, you must ask yourself, how did they get it? Did they sacrifice their health, their peace, their relationships for a fleeting taste of success? Or did they build patiently with balance, leaving them not only wealthy but whole? Numbers alone cannot answer that. Only the stories can. And so, when you consider your own path, do not measure only the digits in your account. Measure the story you are writing with your choices. Because in the end, wealth is not just a figure. It is a life behind the figure. Chapter 5, Freedom Beyond Money. You have been taught to see freedom as a number, a balance, and an account that promises you will never have to work again. But real freedom cannot be reduced to digits on a screen. It is not just about retiring from a job or collecting enough to cover your bills. True freedom is about the choices you can make, the life you can shape, and the peace you can carry within yourself regardless of what markets do. Money can open doors, but it is not the house itself. The myth of retiring young seduces you into believing that once you reach a certain level of wealth, every problem dissolves. Yet history and human experience prove otherwise. Many who achieve sudden financial success discover that their anxieties remain. They still argue with partners, still feel restless, still search for meaning. Money frees you from certain burdens, but it cannot free you from yourself. If you hate your life now, piling up dollars will not transform it into something you love. What changes life is clarity about who you are and what truly matters. Take the example of Samuel, who sold his small business in his 40s for $2 million. On paper, he was free. He no longer had to wake early or answer to clients. For the first 6 months, he traveled, indulged, and celebrated. But slowly the glow dimmed. Days stretched long and empty, without a sense of purpose. The wealth that was supposed to liberate him became a cage of idleness. He grew irritable, anxious, and depressed until finally he returned to work. Not because he needed the money, but because he needed meaning. His story shows you that money can buy time, but it cannot tell you how to use it. That answer must come from deeper places. Now consider Diane, a social worker who never earned more than $45,000 a year. She lived frugally, saved modestly, and retired in her early 60s with a pension and a nest egg of $300,000. By financial standards, her resources were modest, but Diane had spent years cultivating community, volunteering, and investing in relationships. When she retired, her days were filled with people who loved her, projects that inspired her, and a sense of contribution that no paycheck could provide. Her freedom was not about never working again, but about choosing the work that mattered most to her. She was rich in time, purpose, and connection, and those riches could never be measured on a spreadsheet. This is the deeper layer of wealth, the ability to design your life according to values rather than pressures. If you define freedom only as the absence of work, you risk missing its essence. Freedom is being able to spend your time in alignment with your soul. It might mean continuing to work, but on your own terms. It might mean slowing down, shifting paths, or exploring passions that once fell out of reach. Money can fund those choices, but it cannot create them for you. The myth tells you that freedom comes after you hit a number. The method tells you that freedom begins when you align your spending, saving, and living with your deeper purpose. Even if you are not yet wealthy, you can taste freedom by reducing unnecessary obligations, by learning to say no, by cultivating gratitude for what you already have. Each step you take toward clarity brings you closer to a life where money serves you instead of ruling you. As you reflect on this, you realize that freedom beyond money is not about waiting for some distant day when wealth is complete. It is about living now with intentionality, so that when money does grow, it enhances your life rather than defining it. Because the richest people are not those with the biggest accounts, but those who can wake up each morning and say, "Today, I get to live as myself." Freedom is often imagined as an escape from work, from bosses, from alarm clocks, from bills. But true freedom is less about escape and more about arrival. It is arriving in a place where your life matches your values, where your energy is no longer drained by obligations that contradict who you are. Money can pave the road toward that arrival, but it cannot drive the car. You must decide the destination, or else you will find yourself lost even with full pockets. Consider the story of Leonard, who built a small fortune through steady investing and frugal living. By his early 50s, he had enough to step away from his engineering career. At first, he felt liberated. No more late nights at the office, no more deadlines. But weeks into retirement, he found himself restless. His days had no shape. He missed the camaraderie of colleagues, the sense of solving problems, the rhythm of contributing to something larger than himself. Freedom without purpose became a hollow gift. Eventually, Leonard began teaching part-time at a local community college. The paycheck was small compared to his investments, but the fulfillment was immense. He discovered that freedom was not the absence of work, but the ability to choose meaningful work. On the other side is Marjorie, who never amassed a vast fortune. She worked as a librarian, earning modest wages, but she cultivated a life rich in connection. She built strong friendships, cared for her family, and volunteered in her community. By the time she retired, she had only $250,000 saved. Yet she never felt trapped. Her expenses were low, her days were full, and her heart was light. For Marjorie, freedom was not about never worrying about money again. It was about knowing that money was not the master of her joy. These stories remind you that freedom beyond money is about balance. If you chase wealth while sacrificing health, love, or meaning, you may arrive with riches, but find yourself poor in spirit. If you chase leisure without purpose, you may find yourself bored, drifting, and unfulfilled. Real wealth comes from weaving money, meaning, and relationships into a fabric strong enough to carry you through every season of life. Think of it this way. Money buys you options, but it is your values that determine which options are worth taking. Without clarity, options become noise. With clarity, they become tools. Someone with modest wealth and strong values can feel freer than someone with great wealth and no direction. That is why freedom beyond money requires inner work as much as financial work. It requires you to ask questions that no calculator can answer. Who do I want to become? What matters most to me? What would I do with my time if I did not have to trade it for survival? Freedom, then, is not a final state. It is a practice. Each day you choose whether money controls you or serves you, whether you measure your worth in digits or in alignment with your soul. Each small decision, to live simply, to spend on what you love, to save for what you value, builds a form of wealth that cannot vanish in a market crash. It builds a life that feels whole, not just funded. As you let this truth settle, you begin to see that the real goal is not to retire young or even to die rich, but to live richly now. To live in such a way that when you do one day retire, you are not escaping from a life you hated, but stepping more deeply into a life you already cherished. That is a freedom beyond money. The freedom to be yourself in fullness, without apology, with or without millions in the bank. Chapter 6. The Real Method to Die Rich in Life. You have walked through the myths, seen the dangers of speed, felt the strength of steady habits, and heard the stories behind the numbers. Now you arrive at the heart of it all, what it truly means to die rich. The phrase itself often deceives you. To die rich is not about the digits carved on a statement, but about the legacy etched into lives. It is about reaching the end not with regret, but with gratitude, not with emptiness, but with fullness. Dying rich in life begins with perspective. You must decide what wealth means to you. For some, it is a number. For others, it is freedom. But at its core, true wealth is the alignment of money with meaning. When your financial decisions serve your deepest values, you're no longer chasing illusions. You are building a life. That alignment is the method, quiet and powerful, that transforms ordinary earnings into extraordinary richness. Think of Caroline, who worked as a mid-level manager for a nonprofit. She never earned more than $65,000 a year. Yet she gave faithfully, saved diligently, and invested consistently. She raised her children with wisdom, helped her aging parents, and supported causes that mattered to her. By the time she passed away in her late 70s, she had left not only a portfolio of nearly $1 million, but also a trail of lives touched by her generosity and love. Her children did not remember her for the balance of her accounts, but for the way she used her resources to serve. Caroline died rich not only in money, but in meaning. Contrast this with Victor, a man who built a fortune of more than $5 million by the time he was 60. He owned properties, stocks, and luxury cars. But his relationships were fractured, his health was broken, and he lived in suspicion that people only valued him for his money. When he died, his wealth passed to heirs who quarreled bitterly over it. Though his account was large, his life felt impoverished. Victor died with riches, but he did not die rich. This distinction is the key. The real method to die rich is not simply to accumulate, but to integrate. You build wealth steadily, with patience and discipline, but you also weave it into a life of purpose, relationships, and contribution. The method is not glamorous, yet it is enduring. It requires you to live intentionally, to resist illusions, to plant seeds and water them consistently, to guard your health, and to nurture your connections. In short, it asks you to define richness not as a finish line, but as a way of living. The method also embraces generosity. Money hoarded brings little joy. Money shared with wisdom multiplies its impact. A simple gift, helping a friend in need, funding a child's education, supporting a community cause, creates ripples that outlast you. Each act of giving reinforces a truth that wealth is not only for you, but through you, a channel that flows outward. Generosity transforms accumulation into abundance. Numbers will always play a part in this story, but they are not the whole story. If you save consistently, invest wisely, and live within your means, you may very well reach numbers that surprise you. But if you stop there, you will miss the essence. The real method to die rich is to build both accounts, the account of money and the account of meaning. To fill both until the day you are gone, leaving behind a life that speaks louder than any number ever could. As you think about this, you begin to see that the myth of retiring young and dying rich was never the real prize. The real prize is living so fully that when the end comes, you can say without hesitation, I lived richly, I loved deeply, I gave freely, and I left something that will endure. That is the method. That is dying rich in life. To die rich in life is not about a dramatic finale. It is about the quiet accumulation of days lived with intention. Every choice you make, every sacrifice you endure, every small decision to align money with meaning adds a layer to your legacy. In the end, the richness of your life is measured not by what you possess, but by what you cultivated within yourself, in your family, and in your community. Think of Robert and Ann, an ordinary couple who worked as a school custodian and a secretary. Their combined income never exceeded $60,000 a year. Yet they practiced steady saving, lived simply, and invested with patience. Over 40 years, their modest deposits grew into more than $1 million. But the true measure of their wealth was not the account they left behind. It was the lives they touched, the scholarships they funded at their local school, the meals they quietly paid for when neighbors fell on hard times, the grandchildren who grew up knowing that generosity was the family's language. Robert and Ann died not only with money, but with memories that continued to bear fruit long after they were gone. Contrast them with Lawrence, a wealthy executive who amassed a fortune of more than $10 million. He spent lavishly, collected possessions, and basked in admiration while alive. But his relationships were brittle, his children distant, and his community impact minimal. When he passed, his estate was divided quickly, his possessions sold, and his name faded from conversation. He died rich in numbers, but poor in life. The difference between Lawrence and Robert and was not intelligence or opportunity, but intention. One treated money as the goal, the other as a tool. The real method to die rich requires you to treat wealth as a servant, not a master. Money must be made to work for your freedom, your health, your relationships, and your legacy, not the other way around. This means guarding your time as fiercely as your account. It means saying no to endless consumption and yes to investments in experiences, growth, and generosity. It means recognizing that the richest moments often come without price tags, a meal with family, a walk in nature, the satisfaction of work that matters. You will still need numbers because money is the language of security in this world. But numbers alone will never be enough. A portfolio of $5 million cannot comfort you on your deathbed if you spent your life estranged from the people you love. A mansion cannot keep you warm if you lived it in isolation. Dying rich means leaving behind a story that others want to remember, not just an estate to be divided. So the real method is simple, though never easy. Earn steadily, save diligently, invest patiently, give generously, and live intentionally. If you do these things, you will almost certainly build financial wealth over time. But more importantly, you will build a life that feels abundant even before the numbers look impressive. And when your final day comes, you will not need headlines or applause to prove your richness. The lives you touched, the love you gave, and the peace you carry will speak for you. This is a truth hidden beneath the myth. Retiring young and dying rich may be the dream you were sold, but living wisely and dying fulfilled is a life you were meant to create. And if you live this way, then no matter the balance in your account, you will indeed die rich in every way that matters.